The Trump administration has reportedly endeavored to prevent a Dutch company from selling advanced chip manufacturing technology to China. According to reports by Reuters and Nikkei, ASML, a world-leading semiconductor manufacturer, delayed delivery of its shipment to China last November after at least 4 rounds of talks between the U.S. and its Dutch counterparts. Exactly what has prevented the delivery from being made? What is the U.S. trying to accomplish? Joining me for the discussion from Philadelphia is Blackburn-Dwyer, founder of Grasshopper Strategies, and in Beijing studio, Professor Baocheng from the University of International Business and Economics. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. So, a quick timeline here for those who haven't followed this story. Now, the company ASML received its first EUV order from China, from the Chinese company called SMIC in April 2018. Then the U.S. started at least 4 rounds of talks with the Netherlands since then. That's according to sources cited by Reuters. U.S. Department of Defense officials met their Dutch counterparts to discuss the security risks of the sale in late 2018 and January 2019. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo urged Rutte, the Dutch Prime Minister himself, to block the sale during a visit to the Netherlands in June 2019. Then in July 2019, during his visit to the White House, the Dutch Prime Minister was given a copy of the intelligence report on the potential risks of the sale. And finally, the company ASML delayed delivery of its shipment to China in November 2019. So when we put these dots together, Professor Liu, is it true that the U.S. is trying very much to block the Dutch company from selling the world's leading chip manufacturing technology to the Chinese company?
I think it's already crystal clear that the U.S. is trying to block almost every leading companies from supplying the key technologies to China, particularly in the digital area. And they are there to frighten those suppliers with their own intelligence. And I think it's more, instead of intelligence, it's more of a threat or coercion, to those suppliers. And for companies, what they do is really to make money, and particularly for leading technology companies, actually they are living on a string, without the continuous supply of purchase order and supply agreement. So they will be in a very difficult financial situation. So disregarding this fact, and the U.S. is trying to politicize everything and to corner China by cornering, the supplier, I think that's really extremely unethical.
Brandon, what is your read of the story from these information that has been reported by Reuters and Nikkei? Can we say for sure that there is a very dirty political game going on here?
I wouldn't call it a dirty political game. What I would stress are 2 things. One, that we have a Reuters report from anonymous sources. The intended client, SMIC, the Chinese company, has never been formally identified, nor has the company acknowledged that they are the intended recipient of the EUV. We also have a relatively unknown sort of back office type of dealing. So we are all commenting on really an anonymously sourced report. That said, it jives with everything that the Trump administration has said publicly, so I'm willing to take it at face value. So if we take it at face value, we have to look at, is this dirty, or is this just what the Trump administration has said they were going to do? The Trump administration has said for basically the last 2 to 3 years that they are going to squeeze China on every single front possible on technology and trade, and particularly for anything that the Trump administration could deem a national security concern, that they would explore every single avenue to block trade or block access of Chinese companies to that technology. And the Wassenaar Agreement, which is from 1996, allows the United States to coordinate with the other 29 members of the agreement on technology that could be considered to be quote-unquote double use, meaning both for civilian and potentially for military. And semiconductor high-end chips is exactly that kind of thing. It's something that has very obvious civilian uses, but also has very obvious military uses. And it gives an avenue for the United States to raise concerns with countries like the Netherlands about exports to China. And that's what we see them doing here. Is it, Non-standard, possibly. Is it dirty? It's not something that China's going to like. It's not something that probably ASML loves, because they'd really like to be able to sell a $150 million piece of equipment to somebody who doesn't. But at the end of the day, it is a little bit more politics as normal and the way that the trade war has developed.
So, Professor Liu, how do you react to what Brandon has just said? I mean, is such an action legitimate, legal, ethical? I mean, we're looking at a whole host of all of these issues at the same time.
Well, I think it's the entire situation is really being overinterpreted, because you know, if you really put the dual use purpose as a excuse for national security, there are two loopholes here. Well, everything can be put into dual use. For example, like a boots, you know, it can be for civilian use, it can be used for soldiers, or food, or anything like that. So chips are really no exception. And the other is, okay, you know, the U.S. is really concerned with its own national security, and now he's, you know, beating the bush and going around the world and to tell everybody with, you know, unjustified evidence to show that, well, you know, this is going to threaten the U.S. security or threaten the security of the host country of the supplier. So this is completely far-fetched. I think it's more of a cohesion, you know, with the extreme hegemonism that is being employed by the United States. And right now, you know, it is there to number one, to really undermine the profit-making of a commercial company, and also to disrupt the entire supply chain, because China is a buyer and they supply also to the world, you know, with all the end products over there. So I totally agree that this is really a dirty and unethical game that is being played.
Is there any legal cases? I mean, the United States, okay, it has been doing things that is very controversial, but it always wants to cite the law and say what it is doing is according to either U.S. domestic law or international law if it chooses to abide by. For instance, here, Brandon talked about the Wasner arrangement, and then there is also the EAR regulation, which is the U.S. export licensing regulation regarding the export of sensitive technology to other countries that could be deemed as some kind of harm to the U.S.'s national security. And there is another kind of legislation which could ban other companies from other countries to export sensitive things to, for instance, the Chinese company, if over 25% of that product is believed to be originally coming from the United States. But the thing is, after an audit, the ASML company case turns out to be not the case. So what is the legal cases here to apply the U.S.'s jurisdiction? Professor Liu here.
Well, I think now the Wasner Pact is itself a legacy of the Cold War. And it is really a morphed version of CONCOM, which was a instrument that is used to deal with the former socialist countries. Now the world has changed so much dramatically, and so this should be, you know, eliminated, you know, far earlier. So now this legacy has died out for quite a long time. Now the U.S. is really trying to reinvent their utility to persuade and also to threaten other countries to boycott China, and particularly, you know, focusing on the emerging industries. And when China is really posing a challenge, it is which is not really a threat to the leading position of the United States. So now it is totally serving the U.S. interest, you know, more of the commercial interest than really the well-funded national security. So 25% rule, if it is really excusable, but going so far to corner China, you know, with all the countries that are either within the Wasner Agreement or, you know, many other countries. So this is really too far.
Basically, according to the Wasner Arrangement, a multilateral export control protocol that's signed to stop the spread of so-called advanced technologies that can be used for military ends, the Dutch company ASML actually had the export license from the Dutch and European authority to sell the machine to the Chinese customers, then the export license appeared to have expired, and it has yet to be approved for their renewal of that export license. So it seems that, you know, something is quite fishy here, Brandon, your answers.
Well, first of all, we need to separate the Wassenaar Agreement from the U.S. standards about the 25%. That rule is about anything actually made in the United States. The United States has determined that that does not apply to the ASML technology. It is only the Wassenaar Agreement that is allowing the United States to have any role in any engagement or any advisement to the Netherlands government about this. When it comes to the export agreement, we should look at a timeline on this. So the export license expires on June 19th. In theory, the company has another 8-week grace period to ask for an extension for it. There is no evidence one way or the other whether the company actually asked for the extension.
No, they did. I think they did.
ASML
The Dutch Foreign Ministry spokesperson said the Dutch government...
They very clearly did not.
No, the government refused
will not comment on individual licensing.
On that, yes. But it does not mean that the company did not apply. And it is against the company's interest if they do not reply for the if they do not apply for the renewal of the license. So it is against logic for them not to. That is also tricky, right?
I would agree on some front, but I think that if we're looking at the Reuters timeline, the intelligence report handed over purportedly by the United States to the Netherlands didn't happen until July. And so that's actually after ASML allowed their export license to expire on June 19th. Now, I would agree with you that ASML has probably every interest in actually selling this to the Chinese company or the customer, identified most likely as SMIC. But the reality is the timeline's a little bit hazy on that. We do see international exports like this get stopped all the time for various different reasons. And we have a legacy across international trade of national security being used in economic arguments to stop trade, from everything from raw resources like rare earths to semiconductors. And semiconductors have been at the centerpiece of many national security debates in trade going back 30, 40, 50 years almost consistently. So where I see this is, yes, this is a problem. Yes, China should be very upset. Yes, this is something where you see U.S. involvement in China not getting something they deem crucial to the future of their economic success. But it's not really all that different than anything that's been done in international trade by all sides for really all the recent history.
So let me ask you this very briefly. In the near future, do you see the situation getting nastier? I mean, the United States going out of its way to stop any such potentially sensitive technology to be accessible to Chinese companies? Brandon.
I think it all hinges on what exactly happens with the next step in the China-U.S. trade talks.
Okay.
We have very positive signs that there are going to be positive steps. There's actually been reference to these non-official type of interference being dropped, and we can be hopeful about that.
All right, Professor Liu, your quick take.
Well, I do not think there is a very strong correlation between China and U.S. trade, but it's really the hawkish groups in the United States that are really looking after their national security. So because it's really not the job of the USTR to look after this situation. So therefore, I'm not really optimistic about the prospect, even after we really successfully conclude the Phase 1 deal and get engaged in negotiation for Phase 2, this shall linger on.
All right, we have to leave it there. We'll see how the situation develops. Many thanks to Blackburn-Dwyer joining us from Philadelphia and Professor Liu Baocheng here in Beijing.